At this point, we have a single route defined, but that isn't really a single page application. We have a single page, certainly, that's our shell page, but we're only loading one view using that ngView directive. So let's go ahead and modify this, and let's add another route, another controller, and another view, and we'll see how to hook all this up together. So I'm going to come in and just copy down the existing win that I have, and we're going to say orders for the path. Now, if you're going to get orders, you probably need to know the customer ID so we can get that customer's order. So I'm going to come in and we're going to add a route parameter here called customer ID. So we discussed this a little bit earlier in a previous section. So at this point, I now have two routes, one for kind of the default and then one for orders. And now we need to come in and do a different controller and a different view. So I'm going to make one called orders controller and orders HTML. Now, just to demonstrate what we're going to grab in the orders, if I come back down to the controllers, and we'll go into customers controller here, you'll see that our customers have some information, including an ID, and then they also have an array of orders. And there's only a few here, but like this one has 2 orders. So what we're going to do is create a new controller that can display these. So let's go ahead and right-click on controllers, and we'll add an orders controller.js, and let's right-click on views, and we'll add an orders.html. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is let's go ahead and start with the controller. So for a typical controller, I always like to go in and do the function wrapper. Now, what we can do to save a little bit of time, though, is come back to customers, and I'm just going to grab this whole controller here, go back to orders and paste it in, and then we'll do a little bit of tweaking here to make it work. So first off, I don't need any of the sorting capability for this one, we're going to say. Let's rename this to orders controller. I am going to leave this in. Now, obviously, we're duplicating our customers between these. We're going to see how to remedy that as we move a little further in the course, but for now, I do need to get to the orders, so we're going to go ahead and leave these in the controller. So we're going to come down here and we'll change this to orders and we'll update these guys. Okay, so now we have a new controller, and this particular controller is going to help get us started. But I mentioned we need to be able to get to the customer ID. If we go back to here, we're going to basically pass a route that looks like /order/2 or something like that, and 2 would represent the customer ID. So what I need to do is get to the route params. So we're going to add route params up here, and that'll be injected. And then since we added that there, we also need to add it here. This again is for our script minification so that we don't have any problems if it gets changed as a variable name. And now what I'm going to do is just come in and get to that route and get to specifically the customer ID. So we're going to create a customer ID variable, and we're just going to take our route params and say dot customer ID. Now that value right there actually came from that value right there. So if I would have named this foo, then this would have been foo. So that's how easy it is to get to the route and grab a specific item or parameter off of that route. Now what we're going to do here is bind to some orders. So I need to have an orders property, and the view is going to need this in a moment. And then we also need a way to come in and work with the customers and iterate through those to grab a particular set of orders based on the ID. So for this, I'm just going to paste in a little bit of code here. Let me go ahead and fix that back up. And what this init is going to do, you'll notice there's no scope in front of it. And the reason for that is that this is just going to be a kind of an internal private type of function. The view doesn't know anything about it. It's not going to bind to it on an ng-click or anything like that. I like to call it a init because this is going to be the first thing that's hit once this controller gets loaded. Now let's walk through the code real quick. As the comment says, we're going to iterate through our customers. That's what this will take care of doing based on the customer's length down here. And then if the customer ID on the one we're looping through equals, and then we have a % customer ID here to convert it to an integer. That's going to take this guy, convert it. Then we're going to grab that customer's order. So if 1 was passed as the customer ID, then we would be grabbing these orders right here. And we're going to assign those up to this scope.orders. Now, technically, you don't have to put this variable right here. I kind of like to put it to define all the things my view needs to know about right up top. Not something that's required. We could just do it right here if we wanted and get rid of this. Okay, so now we have a way to get the orders, and if we did have a match, we'd probably want to stop our loop. So I'm just going to add a break right here, and that'll break out of the loop because we already found our match. All right, so that should take care of our controller. Now what we need to do is go into the view for this and add a view. So let's go into our orders.html, and I'm just going to, again, to save some typing here, paste in a snippet. And all we're going to do, it's very simple, is write out a product and the total of that product. And so we're going to do an ng repeat the different rows, and what that will do is write out the product, the total, and then we'll convert that total to a currency using a filter. Some of the stuff we covered in an earlier module of the course. Okay, so now, if we go ahead and save that guy, we now have a controller, we now have a view, and in the app, we've now done the different parts here. We're able to get to the route parameter. We now have that controller, and we now have that view. Now, I do need to go into the root page, the shell, and we need to add in a reference to the order. And so let's change this to orders controller, and that'll let that be available. Okay, so at this point, we now have two routes. When we first load the page, we should go to this route. Then when we go here, we'll go to the order details, but we don't have a way to navigate from our customers over here into our orders. So what I'm going to do to fix that is actually something that's pretty simple. We're going to come in and just add kind of a empty header right here. And here, I'm going to come in and we're going to add a little link they can click on to view the orders. So we're just going to add a standard href. So what I'm going to do now is add a link to get to these orders. So let's go ahead and we're going to put a hash orders. Now, I don't want to put /orders because that would be a server type path. Because we're in a SPA scenario, we're going to go ahead and put a hash on front of it. And then we also need to pass the customer ID. Well, we're looping through the customers already, and I already showed that each customer has an ID property. So what we can do is come on back to our customers, and we can now add in a little expression, and we could say cust.id, and we'll add that in, and then we'll go ahead and end our anchor, and I'm just going to call this view orders. All right, so pretty simple. When they click on view orders, it's going to navigate to the orders route, and it's going to add on the customer ID onto the end of that, and then that should display the orders view. All right, so let's go ahead and try it out. I'm going to get back onto the shell page. We'll go ahead and run this, and we should now load up our customers. All right, there's our view orders. Let's go ahead and click on it, and looks like we don't have anything. So let's see what I missed. All right, so I don't see any errors there. So let's go ahead and go on back now to our orders controller. And let me just make sure that we are binding properly. All right, that looks pretty good. I know what it is. So we have an init, but the init never got called. So I'm going to make sure that customers are loaded. So I'm going to come on right down here, and we're going to add init right there. Okay, now let's go back to the shell. And now our controller should actually render our orders. Let's try it out, and there we go. So we can now navigate, and notice when I hit back, it's not going back to some previous news site or sports site or whatever I might have been on. It's actually going back to the previous view that we were at. That looks like it works great. So that's an example of how we can actually configure multiple routes, how we can also use a route parameter, and we kind of revisited how to add a controller and how to add a view.